Hello, everyone. This is Gary London. I am Senior Principal with London Motor Advisors, and here with me is my partner.
Nathan Moeder.
And we thought that we would just drop this fairly quick video to discuss something that is going on in the city of San Diego with respect to ADUs. Nate, you want to define ADUs for everyone?
Accessory dwelling units where you can build a unit fully functional and separate from a house in your backyard, or you can do it, you can convert it an attached garage or something that was priorly being occupied, and you can convert that to an ADU as well.
And this emanates from the state. The state allows for the ADUs and requires a certain amount to be built. But the city of San Diego has sort of taken that maxim and said, we're going to build upon that and allow even more units. Correct?
Yeah.
So what has happened is that yesterday, the San Diego City Council, I guess almost unanimously voted to essentially take another look at the ADU subject in the city of San Diego. And this was catalyzed by at least one project, maybe others, where somehow the ADU formula was expanded so that more than one unit, or even more than just a couple of units in a single family lot, were allowed to be developed. And I think one of the projects was what, over 8 units, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was multiple units. It wasn't just one or two. Yeah.
So we were having this discussion this morning prior to dropping this video, and we realized that this felt more like a subdivision than it did an ADU. Now, full disclosure, I am in an ADU right now. I have a home behind my home, and I don't use it as a dwelling unit. I use it as an office, home gym, that's that sort of thing. A lot of people use them that way. A lot of people use them actually as what they originally dubbed, which was granny flats. And the city has been very aggressive in allowing these ADUs, which on the face of it is a good thing. The problem becomes not just when you add these multiple units, which again sort of start to look like a subdivision, but in the sort of the very essence of what is considered to be the need for housing in San Diego. So, Nate, why don't you just sort of extrapolate from that and sort of set up the problem here?
Well, the problem is, I think a lot of communities are raising red flags now, saying, having two-story structures and putting 8 units or so in a backyard is not consistent with the community. It's not sufficiently parked. There's all of those arguments, and that's why the city of San Diego has pushed pause now to relook at the policy and what they're encouraging. I think what it stemmed from is city of San Diego went beyond state law of what state law permits in terms of ADUs, which good on the city to try to create more housing, but it's really opened the floodgates for these types of projects to just stuff properties with multiple units, not just one ADU. And I think that's where the problem has been created. When we looked at ADUs, in our regional planning in Sandagan, and they're looking at ADUs, they're not assuming 8 units in the backyard. They're just putting one unit back there in their regional forecast. State of California, they weren't assuming 8 units in the backyard. They were doing one, maybe two if there's something being converted. And so what it's resulted in is a business plan for developers to come in and put a lot of units there. And when it comes down to it, a lot of them are smaller units. They are mainly studios and one bedrooms because that achieves the highest profitability. And so now, the city's right, I think, in taking a pause to look at the policy to say, is this the right direction of housing that we need? Because throughout the region, what we're really missing is family housing, multiple bedroom units that can house families. And state law allows for ADUs to be discriminatory and in favor of families. But we don't do that in San Diego. We just say, let's put up as many units as we can because we have housing elements to fulfill. And that's not really the right approach. So I'm glad that the city of San Diego has taken a pause to look at this policy and ask itself, are we doing the right type of development for what we need in the region?
Well, my concern is that I don't want anybody to misread this discussion. You and I are pro housing. We are pro-housing advocates. What we've been basically saying is that it's not the number of units, any kind of units that you can slap into the community that ought to be the focus, which seems to be sort of the bastardization of the ADU formula right now, or whatever the loopholes are. The need right now is for housing for families or people that expect to have families. And so our focus has been on minimum lot size, quite frankly. In other words, the minimum lot size in the city of San Diego is right now, and has been for about 100 years, 5,000 square feet. And we've asked the city of San Diego to consider bringing that minimum lot size down to 1,000 square feet. Because what we assume will happen with that is that then we're going to get a shift to an emphasis on single family homes, but on smaller lots, which means townhomes and row homes, where the interior space, the conditioned space, is accommodatable for 2 and 3 bedroom homes for families, which is very different than what sort of the ADU situation is. So the idea here is not to create a what has been a really pro-housing city council and start to throw out the baby with the bathwater and turn into an anti-housing city council. It's just to look at loopholes in the ADU ordinance and ask yourself, is this really solving the housing problem? Did I set that up right, Nate?
Yeah, I think you did. The most important thing is, I mean, yes, we are pro housing, but the key is we're pro right kind of housing. Right now, throughout the state, the way that we plan our communities is if we need 100,000 housing units, nobody's looking at how many are family units versus married and new couples or just single people. None of the plans look at that. So we're basically building with blinders on. And the current policy is to encourage smaller units because that's most profitable, especially when it comes to high costs of housing. When you have to include affordable housing and things like that, developers will build the smallest units. And who's being left out are the families. And that's not what we need right now because single family home production is cut off by about 6,000 units a year. So if anything, everything we should be building right now, the majority should be multiple bedroom units that can house families to replace that single family inventory. But we haven't been doing that for the last 7, 8 years. It's all been small stuff. So it's no wonder that pricing is so out of control for townhomes and condos right now. We need to start tackling that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the other thing I want to point out is there sort of is an out of scale situation going on here. There's not been that many ADUs built since the loosening of the ADU ordinance. I don't exactly know the number, but I think it's less than a couple thousand units in the whole city of San Diego. And and I also want to point out that many of those units, and you and I are sort of having a debate as to how many, but many of those units probably aren't even being used for housing at all. They're being used sort of for what I use the unit for. And I don't know if that cuts it down by 10% or 50% or something in between, but it's not a lot of numbers. So there's a lot of emphasis in the media and in the and in land use circles about ADUs, but it's not as big a deal as really what you and I are talking about, which is we really need for the city, this city, the other cities, and particularly the county of San Diego, to start getting into the housing game to provide housing for families, because we know absolutely from the census that San Diego has a mass domestic outmigration problem. And it's mostly consisting of people of the demographics that you just described who are leaving San Diego. And that represents sort of the heart of a lot of our economic sustenance in this region. And we really need to be laser focused on that, not on this issue.
Yeah, it's important to note that pendulums swing all the time, whether it's economic cycles, political affiliations, and governments. I mean, now the pendulum is switching the other way, and it's time because when we look at the floodgates being opened and encouraging all of this density in these neighborhoods, nobody's considering the parking impact. I know community groups have been screaming about that. I said that right away, and you said that as soon as this policy came around, is where's everybody going to park? Maybe a street can accommodate one project like this, but if you put multiple there, it's going to be a parking nightmare. So
Right.
I think
No,
it's okay to pause and start thinking about those impacts because we're delusional if we're thinking everybody's going to be taking the buses and mass transit. That's not happening. And even if you think it's going to happen, it's not happening overnight. So in the short term, even the long term, we have to figure out these impacts. I think those are valid concerns by communities and valid concerns that I've shared all along.
Yeah, me too. In other words, an 8-unit project that's dubbed an ADU right now, or a 17-unit project that's dubbed an ADU right now, which happens to be the photo that was in the San Diego Union Tribune this morning, is not an ADU. That's a subdivision. And it needs to go through a process where community services and infrastructure and ways to mitigate any issues are all sort of on the table and not squeezed in through sort of a loophole. Good land use planning needs to prevail.
Yeah, and we also have to think about the business. Building ADUs is the most inefficient way to build housing because you're using trades to come in to just build 1 unit or 2 units. The best way to build housing is when you have 20 units or 50 units or
Right.
more, when the trades are moving from building to building and moving along. So it's a very slow and inefficient use of our labor, which we already have a major labor shortage
We're gonna
in
have more.
California,
Yeah.
especially in the South.
Yeah, well, this is a scaling problem. We need to, developers build to scale. And again, the idea of allowing smaller lot sizes and developers being able to buy and build on what are now contiguous single family lots in a lot of neighborhoods. That's the way to go, because that's where you get to scale. And that's where you serve the market, which we really need to serve right now, that missing middle market. So with that, we are done. I hope that sort of informs the discussion out there. Thanks again, Nate.
Bye.